The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim is an enormous game with a plethora of interesting characters, invigorating quests, and hidden mysteries. Nearly a decade since its release on November 11, 2011, the effects of Skyrim's launch are still being felt today in the structure of similar games releasing now. Winning several awards, including IGN's Game of the Year, and transcending a generation of consoles, Skyrim is one of the most successful video games to have ever been published. For the sake of time, I will not be able to encompass the entirety of Skyrim's massive scope. However, we will be discussing an integral part of Skyrim's recipe for success: the relationship between Skyrim and the idea of individual identity. The acknowledgement of differing identities by NPCs, or non-player characters, is essential to creating a realistic dynamic in an in-game society. In a realm of increasingly complex narratives, and a mountain of lore to back them up, Skyrim offers the player a chance at utilizing all forms of identity and character. Where else is there an opportunity to live as a bipedal, cat-like person with racial history and stories of triumph? With this ability, it allows players to manifest themselves into the completely immersive and responsive world of Skyrim. This is due in part to identity-based AI mechanics that mimic how a society works in the real world, both positively and negatively. The objective of this analysis is highlighting the relationship between Skyrim's societal structure and the level of immersion felt by the player, where immersion is based on semi-realistic to realistic factors and characteristics of an enjoyable but grounded experience. Skyrim's main narrative is dominated by the return of dragons, led by Alduin, the World Eater.
Oblivion is out! Sentries, what do you see? It's in the ground!
The return of the Dova, or the dragons, is part of an ancient prophecy inscribed into Alduin's Wall, an ancient Nordic ruin located in the Reach, which is one of the 9 holds in Skyrim. This prophecy and the subsequent return of the dragons foreshadows the end of the world and is thought to be inevitable at the beginning of the game. However, during the opening quest of the game, it is realized that someone may have something to say about that. The player casts as someone who is very essential to the game, who is later known as the Dragonborn, an individual that shares the mortality of people and the bloodborne power of a dragon.
In the very oldest tales, back from when there were still dragons in Skyrim, the Dragonborn would slay dragons and steal their power. That's what you did, isn't it? Absorb the dragon's power. There's only one way to find out. Try to shout. According to the old legends, only the Dragonborn can shout without training, the way the dragons do.
Dragonborn? What are you talking about?
That's right. Stories about the Dragonborn. Those born with the dragon blood.
The Dragonborn's prowess and power are set in stone both figuratively and literally. However, the Dragonborn's identity is left to be configured by the player. This configuration of race, appearance, personality, skills, and allegiances orchestrate the way Skyrim society interact with the Dragonborn throughout the playthrough. While the return of Alduin and his dragon army casts a large shadow over Skyrim, there is many more additional subplots for the Dragonborn to attend, including a bloody civil war between an empire and the Stormcloaks, a vampire lord returning to power, the various guilds, and more. In addition to multiple quest lines, the player has a choice to customize their character to their liking. From facial customization to the 10 available races, the possibilities are endless. Each race is accompanied by their own unique traits and abilities. These races include Argonian, Breton, Dark Elf, High Elf, Imperial, Khajiit, Nord, Orc, Redguard, and Wood Elf. Each ability is different depending on which race the player chooses. On IGN, it breaks down all the starting stats and race abilities. All races are equal, however, each race has its own unique abilities and stats. For example, the Argonian race is different from all because of its scale-like skin and its ability to breathe underwater. Also, there is rumors that Argonians can swim faster than any other race. Role-playing games offer the opportunity to imagine the self within a different culture and/or race. In this case, we will delve into Skyrim's interactive realism and its relation to identity revolving around race and racism. Victoria Cooper makes a good point about the idea of the term race, implemented into fantasy in her academic article, Fantasies of the North, Medievalism and Identity in Skyrim. One might argue that fantasy could be free of the social issues and the complicated history associated with the word race if it were to simply adopt different terminology. However, ethnic and racial coding is always presented within fantasy, and the problematic state of popular racial representation could not be solved by avoiding the term. Skyrim's inclusiveness and realism offers a universal experience to players. The way storytelling is told within games is different than reading a storybook novel. For example, the I in a story is told by the character, a character in which you are reading about. However, when playing or interacting in a video game, the I is the player, or you. This reverts back to the ideology of individualism and identity. An example of how conflicting identities can have an effect on the player's experience in Skyrim would be during the opening of the game. The player interacts with Hadvar, an Imperial Nord who serves as the name caller for the beheading. After the character creation, Hadvar will have a different comment depending on which race the player chooses. If one is a Nord,
You picked a bad time to come home to Skyrim, Kinsman.
an Imperial,
You're a long way from the Imperial City. What are you doing in Skyrim?
or even a Dark Elf.
Another refugee? Gods really have abandoned your people, Dark Elf.
These are just a few of the 10 differing dialogue changes. This is important to the foundation of Skyrim, introducing it early into the gameplay. It gives the player a little insight of how they might be treated depending on their race. These differing interactions are especially important to the overall immersion the player feels to Skyrim's in-game society, in a way resembling a realistic society. Video games that have these immersive qualities are essential to creating a successful experience. Skyrim is a defining game in the fantasy genre. It is one of the most primary forms of media that provides a useful and direct example of the genre. While similar games would have been useful in this analysis, Skyrim overpasses all other options. Skyrim's ability to merge fantasy and realism is key to its success. This game offers the player a realistic setting of each different race, species, and what they encounter. These racial issues may be problematic. It does not discontinue the player's ability to enjoy the game. For others, it may be about the experience of living through a different life. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim offers the player to explore a medieval-like fantasy world through different identities and race.